So on Thursday we talked about consumer surplus, producer surplus, total surplus, and the way that this market economy maximizes the gains from trade. So consumer surplus is defined as the difference between the willingness to pay and the price that we actually bought the item. So as you remember, as we talked about on Tuesday, the demand curve slopes down, meaning the lower the price of the item, the greater the quantity demanded of that particular item. So the demand curve is sloping down, and we have a quantity and a price. And let's just say, and I'm not going to draw the supply curve at this point, but we know that it's the supply curve that would determine this. But let's say we knew that equilibrium price was this. But we also know that if the price were higher, that we would sell some of the item. Right? We would sell less than the equilibrium quantity. But if the price were higher, we'd still sell some, which means that there were some people who were willing to pay for the item, or would be willing to pay for the item if it were higher. But because this is the equilibrium price, this is the market price, this is the price that they get to pay for it, anybody that was, say, at this point on the demand curve and would have been willing to buy this quantity if the price were up here, with the price down here, of course, they're still willing to buy. And so the difference between what they were willing to pay and the price they would have been willing to pay and what they actually had to pay, we call that consumer surplus. And so if you think about, there might be a point where the price is high enough that 0 people will want to buy, and that every price lower, you're going to have some buyers, all the way down to the equilibrium price. This entire area, so the difference between this willingness to pay and the price and this willingness to pay, added all together, this whole area becomes what we call consumer surplus. And this is just a way to graphically illustrate or to talk about the gain from trade. So let's say you were going down to the store and there was an item you were thinking of buying, and you said yourself that you'd be willing to pay up to $10 for it, and you get there when it was only $7. Well, you'd buy the item anyway, and that $3 would be your consumer surplus. And it's not any money that you could look at or have, but it's just that as you went home with that particular item, you had $3 worth more. It was worth you $3 more than what you actually had to pay for it. And so that is your gain from trade. That is your consumer surplus. Same idea, we talk about a producer surplus, which is the difference between the cost of the to the seller, in the sense their willingness to sell, or what they're giving up by selling you the item, and the price. And remember, we had a supply curve that is sloped upward, and is going to intersect the demand curve at the equilibrium quantity. Actually, we determine the equilibrium quantity by where those two lines intersect. But again, we could think about that at every point along the supply curve, there's someone that would have been willing to sell, or there's some quantity that would have been sold at that particular price, and then if the actual price is higher, then the difference would be what we would call producer surplus. And again, you could add all of this up together, and this whole area would be thought of as the producer surplus, and then add them together, the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus, and we just call that the total surplus. This is our total gains from trade, and this is the market economy in general is going to maximize producer surplus by getting us to that price where the supply equals the demand, where we have the market clearing price at the equilibrium quantity. We have maximized the total surplus, and we have maximized the gains from trade. So now let's think about a little numerical example. My little notes here. Let me redraw this. So let's say we had an item where if the price were at $50, there would be 0, and 0 people would be willing to buy it at $50, and have a demand curve that slopes downward, of course. And let's think about the fact that if, say, the price were $5, there would be nobody willing to purchase the item. Excuse me, nobody willing to supply the item, and as the price rose, sellers would come into the market, and we could sell the item, and it would intersect such that the equilibrium price would be $30, and the equilibrium quantity sold and bought would be, say, 20 items. So we could easily calculate the, oh, you know what, let me just arbitrarily, let's just raise this to 55. So let's say that if there were if the price was $55, 0 items would be purchased. If the price was $5, 0 producers would be, or there would be no one willing to supply the item at all. And so as the price rose, more and more producers would be willing to come into the market, more items would be available for sale, and as the price fell, there would be more and more buyers, and we would end up at an equilibrium quantity of 20 and an equilibrium price of 30. And so the producer surplus would be this area, sort of here in red, and the consumer surplus would be this area up here in green. And we can actually calculate it, that the consumer surplus is going to equal half of 55 minus 30, which is this from here to here, times 20, because this is 0 and this is 20, so times 20, which is of course going to be a half of 25 times 20, which is going to end up being 250. So that would be your consumer surplus, and they don't have to equal, but in this particular case, just because of the way that I have developed this example, they do equal. Our producer surplus is going to be 1/2 of, this is 30 minus 5, times 20. Of course, again, it's the same base here. Remember, this is our 0 point, so this is the quantity equals 0. This is the quantity along the x-axis, and this is the price along the y-axis. And so half the base times the height, so the height is 30 minus 5, which is 25, times the base, which is 20. And again, so that's half of 25 times 20, which equals 250. So the producer surplus and the consumer surplus happen to equal each other, because I sort of draw these lines symmetrically, and both the producer and consumer surplus are 250 each, so total surplus would be 500. So let's think about this being, let's say this is again our market for sweaters. And let's talk about, again, the jackets prices falling, and so people are more willing to, or want to purchase more jackets, and so the demand for sweaters falls. And so, well, we were talking about demand in the green. So let's say that the demand for sweaters falls in that for any particular price, or really that any well, let's just put this demand curve just $5 lower than it was on every particular quantity, so that so this becomes 50 and and but let's just end up intersecting our supply curve at 25. And so I'm not sure it's exactly going to be the same slope that we're going to be able to hit this right at 25. Let's say that we get, so maybe it wasn't exactly at 50, but let's put this down to 50, and let's end up hitting our supply curve at 25. And let's think of our quantity has moved into 15. Not sure that would exactly line up if we were drawing straight lines, but let's just sort of pretend that this would work. And so we have the quantity has moved down to 15, the price has fallen to 25. That's what happens when a demand curve comes in, when the price of a substitute decreases, demand falls, and we're going to end up with a lower quantity and a lower price. And now we can think about what's happened to the consumer surplus and the producer surplus in terms of the sweaters. And so the first thing to realize is that, of course, our producer surplus has really taken quite a hit. It's now 25 minus, so it's going to be half of 25 minus 5 times our new quantity, which is 15. So it's going to be half of 20 times 15, which of course equals 150. Remember, our producer surplus before had been 250, so now we have 150 of producer surplus. But our consumer surplus has also come down, in terms of the sweaters at least. There's basically, because we have fewer transactions, so even though the price is lower, which of course is good for consumers, we just have fewer sweaters changing. There are gains from trade, and when there's less trade, at least in terms of the sweaters, there's going to be less gain. And so our consumer surplus, to be consistent here, I'll move back to the green. Our consumer surplus is going to be 1/2 of 25, 50 minus 25. Remember, our demand curve fell at the intercept, and as well as we get to a lower equilibrium price. So it's 50 minus 25 times our new quantity, which is 15. So this is half of 25 times 15, and I did it out earlier just to, and so that's 187.50. So again, it's lower than our 250, and it's because we have a lower consumer surplus because we have less trade, so we're going to have less gains from trade. But of course, the fall was less than the hit that was suffered by the producer surplus, because this producer surplus got hit for two reasons. The price is lower, and of course producers would rather have a higher price than a lower price, and of course we have a smaller number of transactions, so they have less opportunity to have gain for trade. The consumers at least had some benefit because they had a lower price for sweaters. They wanted, they liked lower prices. Of course, they had a lower willingness to pay. So the difference between the willingness to pay and the price, which is our consumer surplus, is going to be squeezed from the top end because we have a lower willingness to pay, and also we have less trade. So that's that example, and good luck with the homework, and I'll see you in class on Tuesday. Thank you very much.